Dr. Anaya Perez squinted at the sky, shielding her eyes from the merciless New Mexico sun. Not a fluffy cloud in sight to counter the harshness of the desert, the relentless glare of the refugee settlement's solar panels, or the stark desperation in the eyes watching her. The Lyssari. 2 weeks ago, their arrival had been headline news. Now they were her problem. It should have been a dream assignment for an environmental biologist's first contact with an alien species, a species so attuned to their homeworld they verged on the mythical. Anaya swallowed, stifling a ripple of doubt. The Lyssari were hauntingly beautiful with their luminescent skin and willowy frames, but their fragility was impossible to ignore. Earth's gravity was a constant strain on their delicate bones, their diet a constant battle against Earth's microbes, the noise of even this remote camp a torment to their hypersensitive hearing. Paradise, Elder Isra had called Earth when they first arrived. The word had echoed through Anaya's team ever since, a mix of pride and unease. Isra, a matriarch even in frailty, had spoken of shimmering oceans and verdant forests that only existed now in Earth's scarred memory. Dr. Perez, a voice with a clipped British accent, jolted her back to the present. Dr. Sinclair, chief medical officer, looked more haggard by the day. We have a situation. The makeshift med tent was a whirlwind of controlled panic. 3 Lyssari youths lay curled on cots, shivering despite the stifling heat. It's not a virus, Sinclair said grimly, more like a psychosomatic reaction. Anaya frowned, kneeling beside a boy who couldn't have been older than 14. His eyes, a startling shade of violet, were wide with terror, breaths ragged. His skin, usually a soft pearlescence, had dulled to a worrying gray. His name is Rylan. Isra's voice was barely a whisper, heavy with a grief that transcended any language barrier. The strongest of my grandchildren, all they have left. Anaya exchanged a helpless look with Sinclair. They had the tech to analyze the Lyssari down to the molecule, but the boy fading before them wasn't a matter of biology. That's when she realized. Not just Rylan, but all the Lyssari were fading. Their luminous glow was diminishing, their once elegant strides now faltering shuffles. It wasn't illness, it was something more profound. Paradise wasn't living up to its name. It's the light. Anaya's declaration a week later echoed through the hastily constructed conference room. The walls were lined with screens displaying images of the Lyssari homeworld's shimmering waterfalls, bioluminescent forests, a spectrum of light Earth lacked. It's killing them, she continued, ignoring the skeptical mumbles from the gathered politicians and scientists. Their physiology, it's almost photosynthetic. Earth's light, it's not enough. The images flickered to a shot of Rylan, his once vibrant skin now an alarming shade of pewter. Isra, usually stoic, let out a sob. Admiral Carter, the highest-ranking military representative, cleared his throat. With respect, Doctor, this sounds a bit far-fetched. Can't we simply engineer some sort of UV lamps? No, Isra's voice, though weak, had the force of a hurricane. Artificial light, it sickened us even before. She trailed off, staring at the image of a planet reduced to ash. The room fell into a stunned silence. It was the first time anyone had heard a Lyssari openly reference the destruction of their world. They need natural sunlight, Anaya said firmly, wide spectrum, unfiltered. She paused, weighing the audacity of her next words. They need more than just asylum, they need a new home. Murmurs turned to a roar of protest. Earth wasn't exactly overflowing with unspoiled habitats. Relocating thousands of refugees was already a logistical nightmare, but ecological terraforming. It was a scale of intervention that made nations tremble. Yet the grim faces of the Lyssari left little room for argument. The next morning, Anaya found herself crammed into an all-terrain vehicle rumbling through the desert with Elder Isra and an unexpected addition, Captain Zoran. Zoran, with his military bearing and haunted eyes, was a jarring departure from the waif-like image of his people. His presence spoke of a past the Lyssari desperately tried to leave behind, a past Earth might soon be facing. We searched for a world like yours for centuries, Isra whispered, her gaze on the desolate landscape. Your scientists, they'll help us find a new paradise. Anaya wished she could mirror the elder's hope. Earth prided itself on progress, on technology. But in those fading violet eyes and the hushed echo of paradise, humanity's achievements suddenly felt small. The next few months were a whirlwind of ecological surveys, desperate research, and increasingly heated global debates. Anaya found herself a reluctant mediator between the idealism of saving a dying species and the harsh realities of Earth politics. "We barely have resources for our own refugees," an Australian senator had argued during a particularly tense teleconference. "And you want us to ship these delicate creatures off to some pristine wilderness? We can't afford to play Noah's Ark." The Lyssari, with disquieting patience, endured medical tests and cultural questionnaires. Rylan, once near death, slowly regained strength under a jury-rigged array of ultraviolet lamps, an expensive experiment that couldn't be replicated for his entire people. Captain Zoran remained a silent observer, stoicism cracking only during a briefing on Earth's military forces. "You have orbital weapons?" he'd queried, a touch of incredulity in his soft voice. When explained the vast destructive potential of humanity's arsenal, a shadow passed over his face. Anaya saw then that beneath the gentle scholar and fierce soldier lay a hint of steel, a man forged not only by loss, but the terrifying responsibility of preventing its repetition. It was Isra who brought a new dimension to the crisis. Her frail form became a fixture in Anaya's lab, not as a patient, but a collaborator. "Your science," the elder said, tracing a delicate finger over diagrams of Earth flora, "it's aggressive. A constant push for more yield, more growth. Ours was about balance." Isra's people possessed a staggering knowledge of botany, the result of an almost spiritual connection to their homeworld. It was humbling and, Anaya realized, desperately needed. If there was hope of finding a suitable world for the Lyssari, it would lie in combining their understanding with humanity's raw data processing power. "A garden," Isra murmured one evening, eyes fixed on a barren patch of desert soil outside the lab window. "Just a small one, to prove it can be done." For the first time in months, Anaya felt a spark of genuine possibility. It wasn't just about survival, it was helping the Lyssari reclaim the connection to the natural world that was their lifeblood. Maybe, just maybe, they could do more than save this broken species. Maybe they could teach their stubbornly earthbound benefactors something about the true meaning of paradise. The Garden Project, as it came to be known, started humbly. A fenced-off stretch of desert, solar rigs rerouted to provide intense UV radiation, and a motley crew of human biologists and Lyssari elders wielding unfamiliar tools. News outlets descended, initially drawn by the novelty of aliens working the soil, but their mockery soon faltered. Within weeks, vibrant green shoots defied the sand, not Earth crops, but Lyssari seedlings nurtured under simulated light of their lost sun. Anaya found a rhythm working beside Isra, the rhythmic thud of a shovel strangely meditative. It wasn't the sleek efficiency of her usual lab, but there was a raw, visceral satisfaction in seeing results bloom in the unforgiving earth. It wasn't just the plants thriving. Rylan, once a ghost, now moved with renewed purpose, assisting his grandmother with a delicate transplanting. The elders, their luminous glow returning, moved with a vigor that hadn't been seen since their arrival. "You've given them back more than sunlight," Anaya remarked to Captain Zoran one afternoon. He stood apart, his usual aloofness laced with a new intensity as he observed the scene. He turned to her, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Hope tastes sweeter when cultivated with your own hands." His words hit Anaya with unexpected force. Her people built, conquered, and innovated, but when was the last time they truly cultivated? Not just land, but a spirit battered down by endless news cycles of scarcity, conflict, the creeping sense of a planet pushed to its limit. One afternoon, a cluster of local schoolchildren arrived. Wide-eyed, they peppered the Lyssari with questions, their fascination a stark contrast to the cynical politicking of their elders. A young girl with fiery red hair touched Rylan's luminescent hand, a fearless bridge between races that made Anaya's heart clench. The world was watching, and maybe, just maybe, it was seeing something more than dying aliens and strained resources. "We forget," Isra said quietly, watching the children depart. "They still see paradise where we see only struggle." There was no accusation in her voice, only a profound kind of sorrow that settled over Anaya heavier than the desert heat. The garden bloomed into a swath of otherworldly colors against the dusty backdrop. Lyssari flowers unfurled with bioluminescent shimmers in the artificial twilight, their engineered fruits offering the promise of a self-sustaining food source. Yet triumph was laced with bittersweet urgency. The Lyssari were thriving in their small, artificial haven, but it wasn't enough. Satellites tirelessly scoured for viable planets, but the reports brought back a stark picture. There was no easy substitute for their lost home. Your Earth. Captain Zoran interrupted a briefing on the latest potential candidate, a barren rock requiring decades of terraforming. His usual composure was laced with an unsettling edge. It's comfortable. The unspoken accusation hung in the room. Anaya saw the same criticism reflected in the guarded eyes of her colleagues. Were they so inured to their own planet's imperfections, so focused on technological dominance, that they become blind to what truly mattered? Admiral Carter bristled. Comfortable? We fight tooth and nail for those comforts, wars, resource shortages. Yet you have them, Zoran countered, his voice low and chilling. We lost everything. Now you hesitate to share a world overflowing with what we lack? Days later, news of the exchange leaked. Predictably, it sparked a firestorm across social media. #Project Paradise trended, but with a cruel twist. Calls to help the Lyssari were drowned out by accusations of alien ingratitude, demands to protect Earth's resources at all costs. You've made us all targets, Anaya hissed at Zoran, confronting him in the quiet hum of the makeshift greenhouse. Politicians who were barely on board will now shut this whole project down. Zoran met her anger with disquieting calm. Perhaps it's time they see what's truly at stake. Your Earth may not be paradise to you, but it burns brighter than any star to a dying people. His words echoed in Anaya's mind for days. Was this Zoran's strategy all along? To push humanity, not through appeals for empathy, but by showing them the stark reflection of their own complacency. It was dangerous, perhaps disastrous, but Anaya also had to admit, it was undeniably effective. The following weeks were a tense blur. The garden project, once a source of hope, became a battleground for public opinion. Security teams had to be deployed to prevent protesters, both those who championed the Lyssari's cause and those who saw them as a threat. Within the scientific community, a rift emerged. Some rallied behind Anaya, inspired by the revitalization of the Lyssari and disturbed by the vitriol fueled by Zoran's words. Others voiced a growing unease, fearful that saving this alien species meant overtaxing an already strained Earth. It all came to a head during a televised round table. The format was meant to be civilized. Anaya, a leading climate scientist, a vocal Lyssari advocate, and against Anaya's better judgment, Captain Zoran. The moderator, with thinly veiled skepticism, posed the question hanging over the entire world. Isn't this whole experiment fundamentally selfish? Shouldn't Earth's interest, the interest of our own species, come first? Anaya opened her mouth to give a measured response about long-term ecological benefits, about the knowledge gained from collaboration. But Zoran stepped forward, his voice ringing clear. Selfish? Yes, but you misunderstand the nature of that selfishness. We clung to a dying world, blind to its destruction, until it was too late. Your Earth teeters on that same edge. You are rich, powerful, and complacent. If saving us means you finally save yourselves, is that not the most profound act of self-preservation? His words silenced the studio. Zoran turned his gaze directly into the camera, his violet eyes searing through the lens. You who would deny us, look around at your world, this potential paradise. Are you worthy of it? The broadcast was abruptly cut off. Outrage erupted across the globe, but the question lingered, twisting uneasily within Anaya herself. That night, staring at the relentless glow of the city lights that blotted out the desert stars, she couldn't deny the disquieting truth in Zoran's accusation. The garden, always a sanctuary, now felt charged with a strange energy. The lyrical Lyssari songs carried on the night air held a note of somber desperation Anaya hadn't heard before. They weren't simply fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future where their wisdom might prevent another world from falling to the same ruin. Yet, could Earth even hear that message over the clamor of its own self-interest? The summons came in the form of a terse government order. Anaya and a small team, including Isra and Captain Zoran, were to report for a closed-door meeting at an undisclosed location. The journey was fraught with tension. Whispers of concessions, ultimatums, and even rumors of forced Lyssari relocation programs swirled through classified channels. Their destination turned out to be a remote research base nestled amongst the Rocky Mountains, a place built for secrets. The conference room held none of the usual political players, but rather the heads of various global space agencies and military intelligence. An ominous shift in tone. "Sit," barked a steely-eyed woman who introduced herself simply as Director Sato. "The situation, as you all keenly grasp, no doubt, has become unstable." Zoran bristled. "Unstable? Your people incite riots at our doorstep, threaten a vulnerable species, and you call that unstable?" "Enough," Sato cut him off. "We're not here to debate morality. We're here to assess the very real possibility that our Lyssari problem is about to become someone else's." The screens lining the room flickered on, displaying grainy recon footage from a deep space network. It was crude, barely more than specks against the vastness of space, but chillingly distinct. Ships, a sizable fleet of sleek, menacing forms unlike anything Earth had on record. 2 days ago, Sato declared, this task force was detected heading in a direct trajectory towards this solar system. Analysts, she gestured towards a grim-faced cluster, believe the most likely target is Earth. A cold chill ran down Anaya's spine. The Lyssari's warnings echoed back at her, a desperate search for paradise found, a fragile peace about to be shattered. "Are they the ones?" Isra's voice was barely a whisper. "We believe so," Sato said. "The force that destroyed your world. And now they're coming here." The implications hung heavy in the air. Earth's escalating refugee crisis was about to erupt into interstellar war. The room erupted into a chorus of panicked speculation. It was an unthinkable twist, transforming the Lyssari from objects of pity or resentment into the canaries in the coal mine for Earth's own imminent danger. "How did they find us?" a scientist gasped. "It took your people centuries." "They followed us." Zoran's voice was thick with fury and a bitter kind of vindication, like hunters tracking prey. Anaya felt the blood drain from her face. They'd brought this to Earth's doorstep, the Lyssari's desperation leading to the ultimate threat. The same xenophobic voices that had fueled the unrest now surely had the ammunition they craved to justify the expulsion, even extermination, of the refugees. Director Sato slammed a fist on the table, restoring a semblance of order. "That doesn't matter now. What matters is the enemy fleet is coming, and based on the Lyssari's descriptions, we're woefully outgunned. Our usual tactics won't cut it." She turned steely eyes to the small Lyssari contingent. "We need you, all of you. Not for sentiment, but survival. Your people faced this enemy before." Zoran stepped forward, his scholar's reserve shed, replaced by the stark focus of a warrior. "We resisted for years, at a terrible cost. Earth, your technology. It surpasses anything we possessed. But unless you change your mindset, your strategies, it will mean nothing." Hours later, Anaya found herself not back at the desert camp, but in a bunker filled with hastily assembled holographic displays and unfamiliar schematics. The greatest military minds of Earth, usually focused on earthly foes, dissected Lyssari data with a desperate intensity. Survival, it seemed, created unlikely collaborations. Lyssari engineers, armed with their vast knowledge of the enemy, began modifying terrestrial weapon systems. Their strength lay not in brute force, but ingenious use of decoys, nimble attack patterns, a defense woven from lessons paid for in blood. Across the table, Zoran locked eyes with Admiral Carter, their earlier animosity replaced by an unnerving alliance born of necessity. Watching these fragile aliens guide the hands that held the fate of Earth was surreal. Anaya saw, with unsettling clarity, just how far Earth had strayed from the Lyssari's path. Her people built, conquered, innovated. They had forgotten, Zoran had reminded them, how to simply survive. The following days were a blur of impossible tasks and improbable strategies. Earth's orbital defenses, designed for blunt force repelling, were hastily modified, imbued with an element of cunning more akin to a retreating guerrilla force than the planet's leading military power. Anaya found herself drawn back to the garden project. The Lyssari worked with renewed fervor, not tending their precious plants, but dismantling them. Seed pods were carefully packed into drones, strange root systems harvested into portable biogenerators. "We can't let it fall into their hands," Isra explained, her voice raw. "Our knowledge, it was always our greatest weapon. They twist nature, turn life itself into fuel for war." Zoran's arrival confirmed her words. "We're seeding lures," he said grimly. "False paradises for them to find, filled not with refugees but booby traps." It was a horrific image, the Lyssari's life-giving knowledge perverted into a tool of war. Just as Earth was bending its technology to mimic Lyssari tactics, the Lyssari were now forced to turn the core of their existence into a desperate gambit. Later, alone in the quiet of her hastily assigned quarters, Anaya accessed news feeds. They were filled with a strange mix of terror and grim determination. The images of the incoming fleet had been released monstrous, biomechanical horrors. Fear spurred action, old treaties revitalized in the face of a common enemy. "This is because of you." The accusation wasn't from a faceless internet troll, but from Dr. Sinclair, his face ravaged by exhaustion. "This war, it's on your hands too." Anaya had no defense, no comforting platitudes. He was right. Yet a flicker of defiance sparked. "Earth needed a wake-up call," she retorted. "Saving them might have just saved us all." Anaya knew it was a thin hope to cling to. This wasn't a tale of righteous victory, but a desperate fight born from past mistakes. They could only hope the lessons were learnt in time. The battle wasn't the glorious clash of starships Anaya had half imagined from childhood sci-fi. Instead, it started as a waiting game played on screens filled with sensor feeds, a deadly dance on the edge of the solar system. The initial traps did their job. Enemy scouts were lured towards asteroid fields rewired with Lyssari-designed energy bursts, or towards dormant moons rigged with makeshift fusion bombs. It was ugly, brutal, but it bought them precious time. When the main force arrived, Earth's defenses weren't what they expected. Guided by Lyssari intelligence, the planetary shield was less a wall than a flickering maze, confusing enemy targeting systems. Small, agile attack drones, a strange hybrid of Earth's tech and Lyssari ingenuity, darted between lumbering enemy cruisers, deploying payloads that scrambled systems rather than causing outright destruction. It was disorienting, infuriating for the attackers. Zoran explained their tactics. They rely on overwhelming force, on breaking their prey's spirit. Deny them spectacle, a quick victory, and you sow doubt. Yet, amidst the small wins, a sinking reality set in. For every enemy ship crippled, a dozen more surged forward. Earth wasn't winning, it was merely slowing its inevitable defeat. In the operations center, now relocated deep underground, a flicker on the far wall caught Anaya's eye. It was a live feed, not of the battle, but of the Lyssari camp. The garden, their sanctuary, was abuzz with hurried activity. "Evacuation," a general muttered, his voice heavy with defeat. "Do they think they can still run?" "No," Anaya murmured, a terrible realization dawning. "They're preparing something else." Leaving the chaos of the ops center, she found a lone comm unit. Isra's face appeared on the screen, etched with the same weary determination Anaya saw on the faces around her. "Anaya," the elder's voice was strong despite the visible tremor in her hand. "We've done all we can to delay them, to buy your world time. Now we give one last gift." On the screen behind Isra, the garden bloomed with blinding light. Not the gentle glow of nurtured plants, but an uncontrolled burst of raw energy that made Anaya shield her eyes. "We overload the containment field," Isra said. "Their technology, it hungers for energy. They will be drawn to it like moths to the flame." The implications hit Anaya like a physical blow. It wasn't evacuation. It was a sacrifice play, the ultimate perversion of the Lyssari's life-giving legacy. "And Zoran?" Anaya choked out. Isra's smile was unbearably sad. "A warrior returns to the stars from where he came. He will guide them into the trap." The trap worked with horrifying efficiency. Drawn by the surge of energy rippling from the devastated Lyssari camp, a significant portion of the enemy fleet descended upon Earth's atmosphere. What awaited them wasn't paradise, but the ultimate fusion bomb fueled by the last remnants of Lyssari knowledge. The detonation wasn't visible from the bunker where Anaya huddled with the survivors, but the seismic shockwave was undeniable. A tremor, a roar, and then a blinding flash of light that saturated the underground monitors, even through layers of protective shielding. When the world stopped shaking, all that remained was silence. Anaya didn't know how much time passed before ragged comms signals returned. The attack force was decimated, the survivors in disarray, but Earth wasn't celebrating. In low Earth orbit hung the monstrous hulks of damaged enemy ships, a constant, terrifying reminder of how close they'd all come to annihilation. The order came grimly through the battered comm system. All surviving units converge on the former Lyssari camp. Search for survivors, human or otherwise. It was Anaya who found him. Zoran lay amidst the charred ruins of the garden, broken but breathing. His violet eyes, dull with shock, met hers. "Did we win?" he rasped. The question was impossibly vast, filled with echoes of a lost homeworld, sacrifices made, and the narrow margin of their survival. "We survived," Anaya offered instead, kneeling beside him. "Maybe that's a kind of victory. For now." Zoran coughed, a bloody spasm racking his body, and then he did the most unexpected thing. He laughed, a weak, raspy sound that carried unimaginable weight. "Paradise," he choked out. "Turns out, it's harder to find, harder to keep, than we all thought." His eyes closed, and for a moment Anaya wasn't sure if he still lived. Then, with a last, shuddering breath, his hand fell open, palm upturned towards the unforgiving sky. Days turned into weeks, then months, filled with the grim business of both rebuilding and vigilance. The shattered enemy forces retreated, but Earth now knew the vast, uncaring universe held threats they never dreamt of. It was an unsettling kind of peace, scarred, tenuous, and bought at a terrible price. The site where the garden once stood was declared sacred ground, a constant reminder, not of alien benevolence, but fragile alliances forged in desperation. Rylan, his youthful light now permanently dimmed by grief, led the commemoration with a haunting Lyssari song that echoed across the barren landscape. Anaya found herself drawn to the site again and again. There was no trace of the vibrant greenery, only the blackened scar and the hastily erected memorial, a simple cairn built from both Lyssari artifacts and fragments of human tech fused together by the blast. The scientist in her wanted to analyze the soil, understand the transformation wrought by the Lyssari's final act. Yet another, more visceral part understood that some things defied pure analysis. It was on one such visit that a flicker of movement caught her eye. There, amidst the desolation, a single, tentative green shoot pushed its way through the scorched earth. She knelt, fingers brushing against the fragile leaves. "Life finds a way," she whispered, less in surprise and more in stubborn defiance. Whether this plant was the result of some overlooked seed or an impossible act of resilience fueled by the Lyssari's sacrifice, she didn't know. It didn't matter. It was a symbol, a flicker of impossible hope she would cling to with a fierceness born of hard-won survival. News came months later of a potential new world for the remaining Lyssari. A barren, harsh planet, but one that, with time and shared knowledge, might bloom once more. It was far away, a lifetime's journey, and only a fraction of the Lyssari would choose to make the voyage. Many were too broken, too tied by grief to the scarred world that was now the only home they had left. Anaya watched their ships leave, shimmering specks disappearing into the vast expanse. She mourned, but understood. Some wounds ran deeper than shared victories or promises of distant paradises. Anaya wasn't the same woman who had first stood in the unforgiving glare of the desert, looking at the Lyssari with a mix of pity and unease. The changes weren't just in the scars she bore, visible and otherwise. There was a new edge to her, an acceptance of the raw, unfiltered struggle it took to simply survive. Her work changed too. No longer grand ecological surveys, but smaller, more focused projects. Restoring polluted rivers, coaxing life back into abandoned mining sites. It was less about conquering nature and more about rediscovering harmony. Word spread. She found herself an unlikely advisor sought after by desperate towns facing desertification, by governments realizing too late that even wealth and technology were no shield against ecological collapse. It wasn't comfortable. Some dismissed her as the alien whisperer, the starry-eyed idealist who'd helped bring war to their doorstep. But more listened, if reluctantly, driven by the hard calculus of survival. One day, an invitation arrived, the seal of Earth's newly reinforced planetary defense force stamped on it. In a nondescript conference room, Anaya once again faced Admiral Carter, older, grimmer, the scars of averted apocalypse etched into his face. "It's not enough," Carter said bluntly, gesturing to the holographic displays. "Beefed-up orbital shields, sensor nets. We slowed them down last time, but only slowed them." The silence hung heavy between them. They both knew they weren't talking about alien threats, but their own relentless drive for progress that had brought Earth to the brink before. "We fight the wrong war," Anaya said quietly. "The enemy isn't out there." She pointed towards the window, toward the endless sprawl of the city that pulsed with a restless energy even in the pre-dawn light. "It's here. In every resource we waste, in every fight we pick over dwindling scraps instead of learning to share." To her surprise, Carter didn't dismiss her words. He nodded wearily. "The Lyssari, they fought for survival. We fight. For what? More? Always more?" He looked at her, a flicker of something like hope in his tired eyes. "Help us find a new reason to fight, Doctor." The task proved even more daunting than saving a dying species. Old systems creaked but resisted change. Powerful men clung to outdated strategies, to comfortable visions of power rooted in dominance rather than sustainability. Yet the image of that fragile green shoot in the desert kept Anaya pushing. There were cracks in the old order, a generation raised on the live feeds from the brink, now demanding more than empty promises. Change came slowly, often painfully. Anaya, the lab scientist turned eco-warrior, became a reluctant public figure. Her words, once confined to academic journals, now blared from protest signs and echoed through angry town hall debates. The powers that be tried to use her, to paint her as the face of either a utopian dream or a cautionary tale. She fought back, refusing to be a symbol, insisting on being an agent of messy, relentless, necessary change. She visited Rylan often. He chose to stay on Earth, the Lyssari elder now teaching in a sprawling school built in the desert, where both human and Lyssari children learned side by side. There was a darkness in the youth, but also a determination that burned brighter than his fading glow. One brutally hot afternoon, they stood by the memorial cairn. Wind whipped at their clothes, carrying the scent of distant rain that might or might not reach their parched corner of the world. "They call you a hero," Rylan said, his voice still touched with the musicality of his people, but now laced with an unsettling bitterness. "For helping bring the war." It wasn't a question, but an accusation echoing the whispers that followed her. "No one is a hero," Anaya said firmly. "We all did what we had to do. Now we have to figure out something better." Rylan turned his shadowed eyes to the horizon. "My grandmother taught me that paradise is a journey, not a destination. Maybe." He faltered, then continued with a hard edge. "Maybe Earth is finally starting to learn that lesson." It was the closest thing to hope she'd heard in a long time. Years turned into a decade, then two. The enemy fleet didn't return. Cautious expeditions ventured into the depths of space, mapping new systems not with eyes of conquest, but of vulnerable explorers seeking knowledge, and perhaps someday a different kind of alliance. Anaya grew old. Her face bore the map of hard journeys, her voice roughened by countless speeches given in sweltering heat and icy winds. Some battles were won, a treaty limiting pollution, a megacorporation broken up, its technological marvels repurposed. Others were lost, progress faltering against the age-old entrenchment of greed and fear of change. Her most loyal allies weren't politicians or generals, but the misfits and the idealists, a Lyssari engineer with hands stained by engine grease as much as fertile earth, a grizzled ex-soldier turned organic farmer, a fiery-haired girl, all grown up now, leading protests with the same relentless spirit that had once defied authority to befriend a dying alien species. One evening, News reached her of Reland's passing. Old age, his body unable to fully recover from the traumas inflicted on his homeworld, and then on this one. She mourned not with the despair of their first grim days on Earth, but with the quiet ache of a shared battle, fought and ultimately survived. That night, Anaya dreamt of deserts and distant stars, of vibrant blooms bursting forth from scorched earth, and a gentle warrior with haunted eyes, both fading into the twilight. Then a flicker of green, a stubborn, luminescent hand reaching through blasted soil towards a sky more vast and uncaring than anyone understood. Waking with a gasp, she walked not to the pristine labs built in the Lyssari's honor, but to her small, stubbornly organic rooftop garden. Decades old, it held scraggly tomato plants, herbs struggling against the urban pollution, and flowers that bloomed with unpredictable color. It was imperfect, a constant struggle, but stubbornly alive. Kneeling in the damp earth, Anaya thought of all the worlds she had never seen, wonders and dangers lurking far beyond their fragile solar system. Of wars perhaps still to come, of battles won and lost in boardrooms and scorched deserts. Paradise, she understood now, was a fool's errand, a destination forever out of reach. Yet, in the stubborn act of planting a seed in the shared fight for a better tomorrow, there was a different kind of victory. Not the conquest of worlds, but the preservation of the spirit, fragile and resilient, that made a world worth fighting for in the first place.